what we have done is we were looking at the place of suing, and when we were looking at the place of suing, we have done section 15, which lays down the general rule or general law that whenever a suit can be filed in any court, then the lowest court which is competent to institute the suit or take that suit will be the one where the matter will be taken up, right? Then we have section 16. Section 16 basically talks about the jurisdiction of the court where the matter will go in case it involves an immovable property. Now, in the case of immovable property, the matter would generally go to the court where the property is situated, right? With one exception, the proviso which is there, if personal obedience is sufficient to satisfy the suit, then in that case, satisfy the requirement of the plaintiff, in that case, suit can be instituted alternatively also at the place where the defendant actually and voluntarily resides or carries on business or trade. Okay. Now let's move forward. Let's come to section 17 and let's see what it has to say. Section 17 says suits of immovable property situated within jurisdiction of different courts. So this basically deals with a situation where again there is an immovable property, but it is situated within the jurisdiction of different courts. I'll give you an illustration and you'll understand. Let me just read out the section for you. This section says, where a suit is to obtain the relief respecting or compensation for the wrong to immovable property. Now underline the aage wale terms that I'm reading out. It says situated within the jurisdiction of different courts, right? Underline this line, with the immovable property which is situated within the jurisdiction of different courts. The suit may be instituted in any court. Now underline this line, any court, within the local limits of whose jurisdiction any portion of the property is situated, right? Then again it has a kind of proviso or a condition, and it says, provided that in respect to the value of the subject matter of the suit, the entire claim is cognizable by such court. So what this basically says is, let me explain by giving illustration. Oh good, Nakul has shared it. Thank you, Nakul. Okay, for the convenience of those who do not have the Beharet, Nakul has shared the section in the chat box. You can please read from there also. Okay. Now just imagine a situation that you have a piece of land, and that piece of land is situated on the boundary of Delhi Gurgaon, right? And it is a very common scenario, very common scene that there is no clear-cut line division between Delhi and Gurgaon, but still obviously there are records are there and officially kahan tak Gurgaon hai, kahan tak Delhi hai. So you have a land which is situated in Delhi-Gurgaon border, and this land is falling, obviously half or some portion of it is falling within the jurisdiction of Delhi courts, and some part of it is falling within the jurisdiction of Haryana court, which basically means that it is falling in the jurisdiction of Gurgaon court, right? Now, when the situation is such, when the immovable property falls in the jurisdiction of two different courts, in such a case, the plaintiff has an option. And he has an option that he can file suit in any of these courts, right? So he can go to any of these courts. He has a choice. Either he will go to the Delhi court or he will go to the Haryana court, that is the Gurgaon court. That is his discretion, right? However, there is a proviso which is attached to it. And what does the proviso say? The proviso basically says that you can go to any court, whether Delhi court or Gurgaon court, that is a Haryana court. But at the same time, you must keep in mind that the court that you are going to go to should have the other kind of jurisdiction, which means what? It should have that pecuniary limit, and it should have that, the pecuniary jurisdiction should also be satisfied, right? मान लीजिए आपका मैटर, आपका जो टोटल प्रॉपर्टी है उसकी वर्थ है 1 crore, right? Your suit is for compensation for like, so the cost of your suit, the whole value of your suit is, let's say, 1 crore, right? So Delhi court has jurisdiction. Delhi court में आप जहाँ जा सकते थे, it was having a pecuniary jurisdiction. But you say no, I'll go to the Gurgaon court, and Gurgaon court does not have that pecuniary jurisdiction. But how does it matter? Only 1/4 of my property is in Gurgaon, so I will just take the value of that 1/4 of the property and go to Gurgaon court. That cannot happen. Whenever you are evaluating the suit, in that case, you have to take the value of the entire suit as such, right? So what it basically means is that pecuniary, जिस भी court के पास जा रहे हैं आप, whichever court you're going to, should have the pecuniary jurisdiction also. I think this is simple, so this should be clear. Now let's move to the next section, which is section 18. Now section 18 talks about a situation where there is a confusion, where there is no certainty or there is no clarity.
Ma'am, sound was break हो रहा है मैम आपका. Hello.
Okay, just wait. All right, I think now it is clear.
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
clear now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So I've told you about all right, I've told you about section 17. Now section 18 now basically talks about a situation where there is a confusion regarding the property falls under which court, right? If such is the case, then what happens? Section 18 says, place of instituting of suit where the local limits of the jurisdiction of the courts are uncertain. Now this section reads, where it is alleged to be uncertain within the local limits of the jurisdiction of which of the two or more courts any immovable property is situated, any one of those courts may, if satisfied that there is ground for the alleged uncertainty, record a statement to that effect and thereupon proceed to entertain and dispose of any suit relating to that property, and its decree in the suit shall have the same effect as if the property was situated within the local limits of its jurisdiction. Then it reads, provided that the suit is one with respect to which the court is competent with regard to the nature and the value of the suit to exercise jurisdiction. Now what this basically means is, let's say there is a piece of land that you have, and this area, you've heard of no man's land territory. In war zones we have no man's land, where the boundary of two countries are there, but one area is there which does not belong to any of them. So that's I think there's a movie also, No Man's Land on it. And it's a very interesting war movie that's there. Okay. So similarly, there can be situations where there is a piece of land which there is no clarity. Let's say it is in the rural part somewhere in some state, and there is no clarity under where does it fall? Under jurisdiction of which of the courts? It may fall under jurisdiction of two courts or more than two courts, but there's no clarity that actually it falls under jurisdiction of which court. In such cases, what the person can do is that he will go to the court and he's going to file an application with this regard that, look, I have approached you because I feel it falls under your jurisdiction, but there seems to be a confusion, so kindly settle this matter. So in this case, if the court is satisfied that yes, definitely there is some confusion regarding the jurisdiction of the court, but it seems that mere jurisdiction may be aa sakta hai. In that case, what will the court do? The court is going to make a statement with regard to this. The grounds on which the court finds that there is a confusion regarding jurisdiction, and thereafter, what is the court going to do is, thereafter the court is going to dispose, institute the suit, take the suit, and also dispose of the suit. And the decree which is given by this court will be valid. Fine. So it says a very simple thing that if there is a confusion regarding jurisdiction of where does the jurisdiction lie in case of immovable property. Please remember from section 16, 17, 18 we've been talking about immovable property only. From 19 we'll move to movable property. So here we are only referring to immovable property. Alright. So it is saying that Yes.
Ma'am, in such a case, can the defendant raise an appeal regarding lack of jurisdiction in the court?
See, if, and that will come to in the section 21, when we do section 21 and 21A. See, generally, if this statement has not been written by the court, that there is a confusion, I feel, and I can take it, then it might be a ground. We'll talk about it when we come to section 21. When can a person raise an objection about the jurisdiction of the court? See, let's come to section 21. Fine?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. Now, second part, which and also the court which is entertaining this should be competent in other respects, which means it should be competent with respect to the subject matter, and it should also be competent with respect to the pecuniary jurisdiction. Now, what does second part of it says? Second part says, where a statement has not been recorded. Who was supposed to record a statement? The court which you went to, right? It was supposed to record a statement regarding why I think that I can take this case and why there is a confusion and all that. And there are actually grounds for believing that there is confusion regarding jurisdiction, right? So clause 2 says, where a statement has not been recorded under subsection 1 and an objection is taken before the appellate or the revisional court. Vikramaditya, here also your answer comes, and also come in 21. Where a statement has not been recorded under subsection 1 and an objection has been taken before the appellate or the revisional court that a decree or order in a suit relating to such property was made by the court not having jurisdiction where the property is situated, the appellate or the revisional court shall not allow, underline this word, shall not allow the objection unless in its opinion there was, at the time of the institution of the suit, no reasonable ground for uncertainty as to the court having jurisdiction with respect thereto, and there has been a consequent failure of justice. Now, it is very important to understand this part of the section. Now, what it basically says is that, let's say you went to the court saying that, please institute my suit, try my suit. The court went ahead. Ideally, what the court was supposed to say, the court was supposed to write a statement, a reasoned statement, that there is a confusion regarding the jurisdiction, but I do feel I can try this case, it falls under my jurisdiction, and you also have to give the reasons that why there is confusion. Let's say the scenario is that the judge has not written this clarification of the statement, that there seems to be a confusion and why he thinks there is a confusion. And a decree is passed, judgment is passed. After that, the other party goes in appeal and the other party says, look, this court did not have any jurisdiction. It has not given any statement regarding the confusion of jurisdiction, and it was not having any jurisdiction at all. And we have this general rule that judgment passed by the court without jurisdiction results in nullity, which means it will not be valid. It will have no value. So in this case, it is being clarified that even if it is a case where the judgment has been passed by the court and the court has not written the grounds of there is a grounds why there is a confusion, or it is not written a statement with regard that there is any confusion at all, if any. In such a case also, the judgment will not be reversed. The case will not be the judgment or decree will still have its value until and unless the person can prove to the appellate court, firstly, there was no ground of confusion at all. There was no reasonable ground for this uncertainty in jurisdiction. It was a very clear-cut jurisdiction which belonged to other court, and this person has filed a suit in the other court. Right? So first he needs to prove this. Second, he needs to prove that because of this judgment, a failure of justice has taken place. It's only and only when a person is able to prove these two things. Firstly, there was no uncertainty regarding the jurisdiction at all. It was a clear-cut case where the jurisdiction belonged to other court and not to this court, right? Second, it has actually resulted in the consequent failure of justice. Because of the judgment given by this court, it has resulted in failure of justice. It is only in such case that the judgment of this court will be set aside. So are you understanding this? Generally, if there is a confusion but the judge is not writing the statement, not giving any clarification or reasons for it, then also the judgment will not be set aside, it will not be quashed. However, if the person is able to prove in the appellate court that there was no ground whatsoever, no reasonable ground for the confusion, and this judgment has led to the failure of justice, in such case, the judgment can be set aside. Fine, Vikramaditya?
Yes.
Vikramaditya, okay. Okay, then we come to section 19. Now section 19 talks about movable property or wrongs which are done to persons. So what does it say? Now I see a lot of students have joined now. Those who have missed your attendance, kindly put it in the chat box, or last 5 minutes I'm going to take your attendance. And from next time onwards, please try to be in class on time. Okay. Now, section 19 talks about the suits for compensation for wrongs to the person or movable property. Now, what does it say? It says, where a suit is for compensation for the wrong done to a person or to movable property, if the wrong was done within the local limits of the jurisdiction of one court, and the defendant resides or carries on business or personally works for gain within the local limits of jurisdiction of another court, the suit may be instituted at the option of the plaintiff in either of the said courts. Which means what? Which means here again the person is having a choice. The person is having a choice to choose the jurisdiction of the court where he wants the matter to be taken up. And that happens, let's take the illustration, it becomes clear with that. Illustration A says, A residing in Delhi beats B in Calcutta. B may sue A either in Calcutta or in Delhi. So what section 19 basically says is that, let's say there is a cause of action is arising at a different place and the defendant is residing or carrying on business in another part, another state or another city or whatever, right? In such a case, the plaintiff gets an option to either file the suit in the court where the cause of action has taken place, within the jurisdiction of which the cause of action has taken place, or within the jurisdiction of the court where the defendant is residing or carrying on business or personally works for gain, right? So, in the illustration that I've given you, Mr. A was you need to keep in mind that whenever you read about the place of suing, you would realize that place of suing is either the place where the immovable property is situated in the case of immovable property. And when we come to personal wrongs means wrong done to a person, right? Or any compensation for movable property. You would see there is all the provisions talk about the fact that suit can be filed at a place where the defendant resides. Now, why defendant? Anyone would like to answer why so much importance has been given to the place where the defendant resides? Anyone?
मैम मे बी बिकॉज कि मैम प्लेंटिफ कोई गलत केस डाल के डिफेंडेंट को मतलब किसी को परेशान करने के लिए गलत केस भी डाल सकता है.
Okay.
Ma'am, principle of innocence until proven guilty, so the rights of defendants have been prioritized in this case.
Okay.
And also, ma'am, to ensure that the defendant can actually show up if there are summons issued.
Okay. See, all of you are correct, and the reason which actually the primary reason is, yes, tell me, Anjali.
Ma'am, I think my opinion is that the basic purpose of filing the case was the compensation. If the defendant, at the convenience of the defendant is ready to give the compensation at his place, it would be better to both the party, plaintiff as well as the defendant. I think so, ma'am.
Okay, fine enough. See, all of you are correct, but another reason which is there is, that it is the plaintiff which is asking for relief, right? And since the plaintiff is asking for relief, everything cannot go in his favor. He is asking another person to appear in the court and answer his claim and come for the hearings and all. So we cannot make the defendant suffer in that way, right? Relief plaintiff को चाहिए. सब कुछ plaintiff के हिसाब से अगर होगा, if he is giving so much convenience, then somebody rightly said, if you want to trouble someone, file a suit at your place so that the person has to travel from, let's say, Chennai to Delhi every time for hearing. Right? And also, the one who is asking for the relief cannot get everything at his convenience. He is troubling the other. It's not troubling legally sense, but generally इसको trouble तो होगा ही defendant को. The defendant has to file a written statement, has to hire a lawyer, has to come for hearings. So you are troubling the other person to come. You are, putting him in an uncomfortable position. So that's why at least he should have the liberty to, he should have the convenience of getting the suit filed at the place where
But
he is.
इससे ट्रबल होगी डिफेंडेंट
Right?
को, लेकिन मैम केस फाइल करने का रीजन ही इसलिए कि मैम डिफेंडेंट ने कुछ गलत किया है.
जरूरी नहीं है डिफेंडेंट ने कुछ गलत किया है. आप क्लेम कर रहे हैं there is a breach of contract. It's not you never know until the case has been decided that if actually the breach of contract has happened or not. That can be decided only when the judgment comes, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Trouble hogi is a very, in a generic sense I told you, but that's not a legal reason for it. But then definitely you are asking someone else to do something extra. The defendant has to do something extra. He has to come to the court, he has to file a written statement, he has to appear for all the hearings. So we are disturbing his routine, we are making his life uncomfortable. So at least this much comfort should be given to him. Right, to my opinion, this is, and all of you are also correct, yes.
Ma'am,
Tell me,
can you
Madhurika.
say, this provision has been included to ensure the presence of the defendant so that there is no excuse he can give in the court for not coming to the proceeding.
Yes, that can also be one of the reasons that he cannot say every time I cannot travel. Yes, that can also be one of the reasons. Right? Okay. Now, just give me 1 minute, Grant. 1 minute. Alright class, let's continue. Now, coming to the second illustration in section 19, it says A is residing in Delhi and पहला वाला illustration का मैंने explain नहीं किया, right? So, illustration A says that A residing in Delhi beats B in Calcutta. So, where has the cause of action arisen? Cause of action has arisen at? Where? Class?
Calcutta, ma'am.
Calcutta, yes. So the cause of action arises in Calcutta and the defendant is residing in Delhi, right? So the suit in this case can be filed at any of these places and the plaintiff can choose whether to file a suit in Calcutta or in Delhi. Now let's come to the second illustration. Now second illustration says A residing in Delhi publishes in Calcutta statement which is defamatory of B. B may either sue A in Calcutta or in Delhi because the cause of action of publishing the defamatory statement has happened in Calcutta. So, and also the defendant is residing in Delhi. So the suit can be filed in either of these two places. Okay. Now let's come. This is clear, class?
Yes, ma'am.
Same case in student had to fight with another student and he can either complain to his own class. Okay, Nakul. Same as in case student had a fight with another student, he can either complain to his own class teacher or that to other students. Yes. So the plaintiff has a choice whom to complain, where to go. Okay. Right, now let's come to section 20. Now section 20 is quite interesting. Section 20 says other suits to be instituted where defendant resides or cause of action arises. It says subject to the limitations aforesaid. Aforesaid means what? The limitations which are provided in section 15, 16 and all the above sections, right? Every suit shall be instituted in a court within the local limits of whose jurisdiction, which means we have given specifications with regard to some kind of cases in section 16, 17, 18, 19. Now, other than these cases, other than the cases that we have referred here, if any other suit arises, then where can any other cause of action arises or any other matter is there in controversy? So where can a person go for filing his suit? It says you can go where? First, A part. He can go to the court within the local limits of whose jurisdiction, the defendant or each of the defendant where there are more than one at the time of commencement of the suit actually and voluntarily resides or carries on business or personally works for gain. Or second part, any of the defendants where there are more than one at the time of commencement of the suit actually and voluntarily resides or carries on business or personally works for gain, provided that in such case either the leave of the court is given or the defendants who do not reside or carry on business or personally work for gain as aforesaid acquaints to such institution, or the cause of action wholly or partly arises. Right? I'll come to explanation part later, but let me explain these things once again. Now, what this basically says is that in the cases other than the ones which I mentioned from section 16 onwards, 16 till 19, if any other cause of action arises, then the person can file a suit at two places basically. What are the two places? Where the cause of action arises or where the defendant resides. Now there are certain situations which are given here. Let's say the defendant, if there is one defendant, we do not have any confusion. या तो cause of action वाली जगह या फिर where the defendant is staying, so that's clear. Plaintiff has two clear options. Let's imagine a situation where there are more than one defendant. Let's say there are two defendants, right? In such a case, and the situation number one is that both these defendants are staying at the same place. Let's say both the defendants are staying in Delhi, right? And cause of action has arisen in Calcutta. Here the plaintiff again has a choice. He can file a suit either in Delhi or in Calcutta. So abhi tak to there is no confusion, everything is clear. Now the problem arises. Let's say there is a case in which there are two defendants. There can be more than two. I'm just giving you, for convenience sake, I'm giving you the illustration of two. Let's say there is a situation where there are two defendants and the cause of action has arises at the third place. Defendant number one is staying in Delhi. Defendant number two is staying in Bombay, and cause of action has arisen in Calcutta. Right? So in such a case, the plaintiff has option of filing suit at three places. Because he can file a suit where all the defendants reside, if they reside at a common place. If all of the defendants are residing at different places, then in such a case, the suit can be filed at the place where any of the defendants resides. So in the illustration that I just gave you, the suit can be filed at Delhi, at Bombay, and also at Calcutta. However, where the situation is that the defendants are residing at different places. Let's say defendant number one, I told you, defendant number one was residing in Delhi, and defendant number two was residing in Bombay. Now here the plaintiff files a suit in Delhi. So Bombay wala defendant kahega, why should I travel all this way to Delhi every time for hearing. I do not accept that. For that, he will give an application to the court. There, the court will decide that the matter will be, instituted in which court according to the convenience of parties. However, if the Bombay wala defendant says, "Koi baat nahi, it really doesn't matter. I anyways have to travel 4 times a month to Delhi, so I can travel here also. There's no issues." I do not have a problem if the plaintiff is instituting a suit in Delhi. Also, I'm fine with that. So either way, if there is an order by the court, leave of the court is there. The plaintiff has taken the permission of the court or leave of the court, or the defendant accepts it without any protest. He says, "Fine, it's fine." Even if you're filing the suit in a place where the other defendant number 2 is staying, I do not have a problem with that. Right? In both these cases, the suit can be filed at that particular place. So is this thing clear? That if both the defendants are residing at the same place, the suit can be filed at that place or at the place of cause of action. If they are residing in different places, so the suit can be filed at a place where any of the defendant is residing. Let's say there are 10 defendants and these 10 defendants are staying in 10 different states. Right? So here the suit can be filed and the cause of action is at 11th place. So here the plaintiff has a choice to file the plaint in 11 places. Fine, class? Class, respond. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, with subject
Alright.
to the pecuniary jurisdiction, in this case also there is a
Obviously. Pecuniary and subject matter jurisdiction will always go there, always be there, in every case. Fine? Fine, Anjali? Yes, actually. Good morning.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, I think I short the plates. I think you would have discussed. But there's a question. Ma'am, like in criminal law, we have specifically provisions, the hierarchy of courts and their jurisdiction mentioned. But when we deal with the CPC and civil courts, they don't have any such specific return somewhere कि यहाँ से उनका hierarchy है courts का, यहाँ पे जाके approach कर सकते हैं. So ma'am, which statute or which law we have to follow for the same?
See, CPC does give you mentions different kind of courts, and it also mentions about court of small cause, it mentions about subordinate courts, it mentions about the jurisdiction more than the court. But yes, you're right, there is no hierarchy of court which is given here. So you want to ask that where can a person go, how will he find out?
Yeah, exactly, ma'am. Exactly. Like if I am residing in Meerut, so like what if I have same case, and so I don't know the hierarchy of the courts in which court I can file my case if somebody is asking me. So how can I tell him?
See, normally, if it is a case relating to the property, then you can file the case only within the court where the property is situated. And for that, you need to look at the pecuniary jurisdiction and subject matter jurisdiction. See, I'll tell you what, normally in criminal law, all the criminal matters go to only criminal courts, and there you decide should it go to magistrate or to sessions court. There is no pecuniary thing in criminal law. Whereas in civil law, where the case is decided on the basis of pecuniary jurisdiction. If it is up to 25,000, it will go to the civil judge, lower division. If it is more than rupees 10 lakh or something, it will go to a district court. So that kind of jurisdiction is different for every state. Right?
Okay, all right, ma'am. All right.
Ma'am, is there any case in our case material pertaining to section 20?
I don't know. I don't think there are any cases there. This is a simple direct reading. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
Chetna, in case the defendant is not ready to travel and all that, then the court will decide. Isme likha hai with the leave of the court or if the other agrees. It's very difficult if all 10 defendants will say, no, we will not come, we are filing a suit at the 11th place. So that cannot happen, then the court has to decide, looking at the convenience of all the parties. Fine?
Okay, ma'am.
Do we have magistrate civil court? We have civil judge. When you give the judiciary exams, the first appointment that you get is of a civil judge. So that's a civil court. Okay. Now coming back to, the part C of this talks about the cause of action. Now what it actually says is that the cause of action, wherever it arises wholly or partly, that court will have jurisdiction. Now let's come to the explanation. Explanation is very interesting. It says, a corporate shall be deemed to carry on business at its sole or principal office in India, or in respect to any cause of action arising at any place where it has also a subordinate office at such place. So this is an explanation which has been given with regard to the corporations and companies and all that. So since they are legal entities but they are not physical human beings, so how do we find out where can we file a suit against a corporation or a company? For that, this clarification is given, and it says that for a corporation, wherever it is having its sole office, if it is having only one office in India, so the place where it is having a sole office is the place where we will say that we can file a suit there, right? Or it is having a principal office in India. Sole or principal is the main head office, right? So wherever it has, if it is having only one office, that place, that area, you can file a case against that corporation or company. Or if it is having several branch offices, but one is the head office, so at the place where that company or that corporation is having a head office, at that place you can file the suit. Or if the third situation, look at the third situation which is very interesting. If the cause of action is arising at a place, and the place where the cause of action is arising, there the corporation is also having a subordinate office. In such a case, the suit can be filed at that place also. Right? Let me read out the illustration. And it says that A is a tradesman in Calcutta. B carries on business in Delhi. A, by his agent in Delhi, buys goods of A and requests A to deliver them to the East Indian Railway Company. Right? A delivers the good accordingly in Calcutta. A may sue B at which all places? A may sue B for the price of the goods either in Calcutta. Calcutta may क्यों? Because the cause of action is arising in Calcutta, or in Delhi. Why in Delhi? Because Delhi is the place where the defendant is carrying on the business. Right? So you can file a case where the defendant is carrying on business or working. Then B clause says A resides at Shimla, B at Calcutta, and C at Delhi. Now A, B, C being together in Banaras, B and C make a joint promissory note payable on demand and deliver it to A. Now, where can A sue B and C? He can sue them at Banaras. Why at Banaras? Because the promissory note was made and delivered at Banaras. So that is the place where the cause of action has arisen. So at that place, A can file a suit. And where else he can file a suit? Now he may also sue them at Calcutta, where B resides, or at Delhi, where A resides. Right? But in each of these cases, if the non-resident defendant objects, the suit cannot proceed without the leave of the court. That's what I was talking about. In case the other defendant is raising an objection or he is not agreeing, that I do not agree that why should this suit be filed at the place where the other defendant is residing and not at my place. In such a case, the court will actually decide where the suit should be filed. Just give me one moment and I'll continue. So this portion is clear?
Yes,
Class? Okay. Now moving forward, let's move to section 21. It talks about the objections to the jurisdiction. See, section 21 says, and section 21 has to be read with section 99. Right? 99 we also talk about more or less the same thing. Now what does 21 say? 21 says, no objection as to the place of suing. Place of suing, you understand, right? The place where you have instituted the suit. So it says, no objection as to the place of suing shall be allowed by any appellate or revisional court unless such objection was taken in the court of first instance at the earliest possible opportunity, and in all cases where issues are settled at or before such settlement, and unless there has been a consequent failure of justice. Which means what? Let's say the case was instituted at Delhi by the plaintiff, and the defendant feels that Delhi court is not having jurisdiction. But the defendant decides to keep quiet. Koi baat nahi, aane the decision, let him put all his efforts, I'll just wait, I'll let the judgment come, I'll go to the appeal, and I'll challenge the jurisdiction. Ya fir, the situation is you had no issues with the jurisdiction earlier, you say it's fine, it's okay. But you didn't even kind of realize that the court is not having jurisdiction. But later on, when the judgment came against that party, against the defendant, then he was very angry. Oh, how can this court give a judgment? Because this court was not even having the jurisdiction. So this judgment is not valid and all that. Right? So, in such cases, the clarification is given in section 21, which says that if you had a problem, and this problem kiske paas hogi? Obviously the defendant will have a problem because plaintiff is the one who is instituting the suit. So it says if the defendant has any objection regarding the jurisdiction, then the appellate court will not entertain it unless you had already raised this issue in the lower court. The court which was trying your suit, there also you moved an application that, look, we feel you do not have the jurisdiction in this case. And the court said, no, we have this jurisdiction. And they went ahead and still they, continued with the proceedings. Then in that case, you can, in appeal also, you can file when you file an appeal, you can challenge this jurisdiction. And also that there is a failure of justice which has taken place. Right? Now part 2 of it, what does it say? That, so basically there are 3 points if you want to take the matter of jurisdiction in the appellate court. There are 3 points that you need to keep in mind. First, objection should have been taken in the court of first instance. That is the court where your suit was instituted, the suit proceedings were done. Second, this objection was taken at the earliest possible opportunity, right? Third, that it has resulted in the failure of justice. If these 3 things are there, then in that case you can go ahead and you can go ahead and challenge the jurisdiction of the court, of the lower court when you go in appeal. Now, part 2 talks about the same thing, but in reference to pecuniary jurisdiction. This clause 3 also talks about the same thing, but in context of execution court. Execution, what is execution? I'll tell you in the coming classes. So when it comes to execution also, this kind of
Ma'am, your voice is breaking.
be
This is glitching.
taken. So, okay, now it's clear? Now it's clear now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Even now it's breaking.
Ma'am, it's clear now.
Alright. Now it's fine?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Now it's fine.
Okay. So I was just telling you about section 21. If you want to challenge the jurisdiction of the court anytime, then alright. So if you want to challenge the jurisdiction of the court, then you need to prove 2 things. Firstly, that you have taken objection in the lower court. Secondly, you took the objection at the earliest possible opportunity. And thirdly, it has resulted in a failure of justice. Right? So that's all for today, class. In the next class, I'll start. In the last class, what we have done is, we were looking at the place of suing, and when we were looking at the place of suing, we have done section 15, which lays down the general rule or general law that whenever a suit can be filed in any court, then the lowest court which is competent to institute the suit or take that suit will be the one where the matter will be taken up, right? Then we have section 16. Section 16 basically talks about the jurisdiction of the court where the matter will go in case it involves an immovable property. Now, in the case of immovable property, the matter would generally go to the court where the property is situated, right? With one exception, the proviso which is there, if personal obedience is sufficient to satisfy the suit, then in that case, satisfy the requirement of the plaintiff, in that case, suit can be instituted alternatively also at the place where the defendant actually and voluntarily resides or carries on business or trade. Okay. Now let's move forward. Let's come to section 17 and let's see what it has to say. Section 17 says suits of immovable property situated within jurisdiction of different courts. So this basically deals with a situation where again there is an immovable property, but it is situated within the jurisdiction of different courts. I'll give you an illustration and you'll understand. Let me just read out the section for you. This section says, where a suit is to obtain the relief respecting or compensation for the wrong to immovable property. Now underline the aage wale terms that I'm reading out. It says situated within the jurisdiction of different courts, right? Underline this line, with the immovable property which is situated within the jurisdiction of different courts. The suit may be instituted in any court. Now underline this line, any court, within the local limits of whose jurisdiction any portion of the property is situated, right? Then again it has a kind of proviso or a condition, and it says, provided that in respect to the value of the subject matter of the suit, the entire claim is cognizable by such court. So what this basically says is, let me explain by giving illustration. Oh good, Nakul has shared it. Thank you, Nakul. Okay, for the convenience of those who do not have the Beharet, Nakul has shared the section in the chat box. You can please read from there also. Okay. Now just imagine a situation that you have a piece of land, and that piece of land is situated on the boundary of Delhi Gurgaon, right? And it is a very common scenario, very common scene that there is no clear-cut line division between Delhi and Gurgaon, but still obviously there are records are there and officially kahan tak Gurgaon hai, kahan tak Delhi hai. So you have a land which is situated in Delhi-Gurgaon border, and this land is falling obviously half